Okay, so in my previous video, you would have seen me review this pristine example of a BMW E34 525i. Now, I figured since I happen to own the successor model, the E39, why not do a video that features both cars and show you exactly how BMW advanced from this to this. Now, the E34 was the third generation iteration of the 5 Series. The E39 here is the fourth generation. As I mentioned in my previous video, the E34 ripped up the previous 5 Series playbook that consisted of the E12, E28, very evolutionary progression, and suddenly BMW flipped the script around and produced the E34, which is a vastly different execution compared to the E12 and the E28. But after that, when they came up with the E39, it represented yet another quantum leap over the E34. And we don't have to remind you how from this to the E60 was yet another major revolutionary shift. It was only came the F10, the G30 that BMW actually went back to a more conservative progression with their 5 Series models. Now, with the G60, BMW once again decided to go a bit over and came up with a styling and appearance that instead of treading the conservative path, they opted to shock and awe. So now, from a stylistic standpoint, the E34 to the E39 was, well, a very big quantum leap. The E34 here was the last 5 Series to have 4 individual headlight units. If the E39 BMW, well, you still see the 4-eye look from outside, but it is all merged into a single visual unit. And here, the E34 also was the last 5 Series whereby the kidney grille did not span the entire width of the grille. There's still these horizontal slats here next to the headlight. It is with the V8 models, later iterations of the E34, that BMW widened this kidney grille to span this entire area, which led on nicely to the E39's nose here. Now, the thing about the E39's front bonnet is that the kidney grille is integrated into the bonnet. Now, this is something that is unique from this era. Very few cars have this feature where the bonnet actually goes all the way down. This requires some very high level of metal extrusion. Now, this design was initially actually pioneered by Mercedes. We saw this in the Mercedes SL, the Mercedes 140, the 124 facelift, and BMW then introduced it to the E39 as well as the E46. So now, despite what seems to be massive stylistic changes between these two cars, BMW actually carried over a lot of styling details and cues from the E34 to the E39, thereby establishing a clear lineage between these two cars. Take this line on the front fender, for example. It starts right here at the front edge of the fender. It goes here, melds into the wheel arch, and watch how, as we walk backwards along the car, you see this waistline in both cars. They intersect with the door handle and it goes all the way to the back of the car. Now, the E34 has always been the boxiest looking member of the 5 Series lineage, whereas the E39, on the other hand, is a bit more svelte, a bit more curvaceous. So you would be surprised as I bring you up close to see. There are quite a number of styling cues here, little details at the back that tie these two cars together. So now, coming back to this prominent shoulder line, see how in both these cars, it meets right where the signal light is, cuts off and goes into the boot lid. And also, well, BMW also preserved the 3-layer design of the rear taillight clusters, even though the shape now is rendered completely different. But here is one more little tiny detail. Check out this welding line here that's present in both the E39 and the E34. Now pay close attention to the boot lid here. See this double edge design that goes here, and once it enters the fender, it flows down and merges into the tail light. And here in the E39, this subtle detail is reproduced, a bit rounded, but you still get this double edge that curves down into the tail light. Okay, so now although the bonnets open in opposing directions, over there in the E34 is the M50 TU engine. It is the second iteration of the M50 engine family that is enhanced with WANOS technology. That's BMW's version of variable valve timing. The M54 here in the E39 facelift is a much more advanced powertrain with double WANOS, meaning it has variable valve timing both in the intake and the exhaust valves. But that being said, this engine, although it is a 2-generation advancement, the basis of the M54 engine started all the way there with the M50, and this engine continued to serve even in early batches of the E60. It wasn't midway through the E60's production when BMW switched to the newer N52 engine family that the basis of that old M50 engine there was finally put to rest. Okay, so now checking out the cabin of these cars, we'll start with the E34. Now, as I mentioned in my previous video, this example of an E34 is exceptionally well preserved. Other than this damaged fabric on the seats and the roof liner, there isn't a single crack that I spotted in this car that is testament to the meticulous care that it has received over the years. Now, remember that this cabin design originated from the 1980s. So technology-wise, it is a relative simpleton. It is a relatively simple, bare bones cabin by today's standards. Look at the door card, okay? It's just one little pocket there and that's it. One interesting feature of the E34's door card is that BMW integrated the aircon vent into the door card, thereby freeing up more space in the dashboard. Now we come inside, you can see this is the very simple, easy to read instrument cluster. Now depending on your version of the E34, you may have some units come with analog odometers. This one here comes with a digital odometer. All right, so this cabin design, this instrument cluster design has been a staple of BMW for many years. It originated from even before this car, and it continues in this car, and it continues on even in the E39. Now, here in the center stack, you can see the traditional BMW design of angling the controls towards the driver. This is when you still see that we have the single DIN audio system. So here in the E34, you can still go to your aftermarket accessory shop and change this head unit, but this is something that is period correct from the 1990s. I wouldn't change it, all right? Here, this car has 2-zone climate control, and you pull this ashtray out, you can see this cigarette lighter pop out, okay? Now here, this is bare, here is bare, all right? But this is a soft area, okay? This piece is actually broken in this car, and but here's the thing, BMW may not have designed it with that intention in mind, but this area now is perfectly handy for us to put our mobile phones. And here they have the hazard light switch right here in the middle behind the gear lever, and the power window controls here along the center console. And here as well is just a simple storage tray here and here. The armrest folds down from the seats, right? So the E34's cabin, from this particular example, quality-wise, is fantastic. It's just such a lovely place to be in. And well, this is really traditional BMW. Clarity, ease of use. I drove this car yesterday around and got acclimatized to it. Easy, easy, easy. Now, on to the more familiar surroundings of the E39. Immediately, you can see this is a significantly more modern car, although BMW assisted with the door card mounted aircon vent. All right. The instrument cluster, we can see that this is still a evolution over what was offered in the E34, but with more digitalization. Here, along the center stack, if you compare with the E34, the driver focus angle is still there, but this is a significantly more advanced cabin. The audio system, for example, is now integrated into the car, all right? So this one, BMW's intention is that you don't go and take this to accessory shop and pasang your whatever aftermarket stuff here, all right? This goes with the car because, for example, through the system here, you can access driving data like fuel consumption, all right? You can look at the car's system clock. All is inside here. So the E39 was one of the earliest cars in the market to offer CAN bus technology in which the car's electronic system is unified. So right here, for example, right, as I cycle through these readings here, let's say like, for example, now I look at the fuel consumption reading. It is impossible for me to reset the average fuel consumption here without this panel. So a lot of E39 owners, they go and change this to the Android unit, then jialat. Why? Because after that, you cannot reset the average fuel consumption meter. And for me, I cannot take that. I cannot take that. That's why this car, even though the temptation is there, I've decided to persist with the original factory infotainment system. All right. So here the air conditioning system is also digitized, although in Europe, lower spec models, I've seen lower spec E39s still with old school analog climate control system. Now, of course, there's no more pop-out ashtray here, but the cigarette lighter still pops out like this, all right? Another cue that was carried over from before, hazard lights mounted behind the gear lever. Now there's a door lock and unlock button. Now this part of my car is no longer representative of the factory offering because I've added these USB-C chargers from rendition. So this is a voltmeter, and in the original design, this is a slider. Okay, now I've converted it into a 3D printed cup holder. So in the cabin, BMW certainly invested a lot more effort to give the E39 a much more substantial center console, and that, I would say, truly transforms the ambiance of the cabin. So now visually, the headlights are the eyes of our cars. And these days, car manufacturers take it to a level whereby the face of the car is no longer defined by the shape of the headlight, but rather the illumination signature inside the headlight. And that trend started right here in the E39 facelift. I remember many years ago when I was a teenager, 16, 17 years old. I remember it vividly. It was sunset, and right there, as I was sitting in my parents' car, looking out of the window, there was a maroon colored E39 facelift driving with the lights switched on, exactly looking like this. and I was mesmerized. And that was really the start of my fascination with the BMW E39. So now, as of yesterday, well, my only other experience behind the wheel of a properly sorted BMW E34, well, was one that was maintained by the limitless budget of BMW Classic back in 2016 when I flew to Portugal for the G30 International Media Drive, and we were given the opportunity to sample the entire range of the 5 Series lineage. My only other experiences driving the E34, well, involved cars that were not so well maintained. All right, suspension bushes that's worn off, creaks and rattles here and there. So yesterday when I drove that immaculate 525i, I was mind blown. I was literally mind blown in so many ways. Okay, because that car really represented, I would believe, how an E34 was meant to feel like back in the prime of its day. So now the question that we want to answer in this video, for the rest of this video, is driving wise, how does the E34 and the E39 compare? Well, the E39, of course, is a more advanced, a more refined, a more sophisticated car than the E34. But the beauty of the E39 is that despite that sophistication, it is still a very analog feeling car because it still has hydraulic power steering. The suspension is all passive, okay? And right, but it's just that it is with significantly more refinement, more iterations compared to what they have in the E34. Now, a critical difference between the E34 and the E39's chassis is that the E34, all of them used recirculating ball steering, whereas the E39 pioneered the introduction of rack and pinion steering only in the 6-cylinder models. The V8s, the M5s still retain the recirculating ball steering from the E34 because of packaging reasons, because the size of the V8 engine in the engine bay did not leave room for a modern steering rack. But we are digressing. So my immediate impressions yesterday when I drove the E34 in compared to my car, well, firstly, because that is a 525, it actually felt faster. It felt faster off the line. But it has a bit more rawness to the car's character. There's more vividness in terms of sensations, in terms of feedback, even though the steering is lighter and less communicative. This is where I really like the E39, where the steering here, yeah, the weighting of the E39 steering inspires more confidence. But that being said, what really surprised me was really how quick and agile, how fleet-footed the E34 felt. It was basically, right, it was like a dancing partner. It doesn't give a lot of grip, but it ebbs and flows around the bends, right? So it's you just know there's so much communication going on between you and the chassis. You know exactly what the chassis is going to do next. You know exactly where the limits of that car, and you know exactly how hard you can push it. So that quality is still preserved here in the E39, but you can feel, however, the E39 is a heavier car, is a bulkier car, but still a relatively agile car by any stretch of the imagination. My God, I have to say that yeah, the last 2 days I really am in motoring heaven, because firstly, I'm always happy behind the wheel of my E39, but yesterday with the E34, I was treated to what was a more raw version of what eventually became of this car. So the E34 has it's more fleet-footed, it's more nimble, it's more agile, it's more ebb and flow towards it, whereas the E39 feels more secure, it feels more planted. Yeah. And of course, the whole driving experience of the E39 is closer to modern day refinement. I have always had this concept of what I call your soulmate car. It is the car that every time when you park, you turn around, whether or not it's the prettiest car in the lot, you just turn around, you look at that car, it feels right? There's something about the way that car looks that feels right to your eyes. And not only that, but every time when you drive that car, when you get behind the wheel of that car, when you sit inside in the driver's seat, it feels like a homecoming. It feels like a homecoming, right? The E39 gives me that kind of feeling every time. All right, I've driven cars that are worth over $1 million, but you know, every time when I come back to this car, E39 here, when I sit on this chair, grip the steering wheel, all right, throw it around a few bends. Yes, it's no longer the fastest car on the road, and because of its age, you know, it may not be best suited for the rigors of day-to-day driving, but this car is, by all accounts, my soulmate car. This is the car that, whatever said and done, this is the car that, whatever cars that I experience or will experience in the future, this is the car that I come home to every time feeling right. This is the car for me. Yeah. So the E34 and the E39, both really magnificent cars, right? Really fantastic modern classics. And the best part is, both of them are now available at relatively attainable prices. The E34 is going through a cycle of appreciation. So if the better condition units in the market are calling for slightly higher prices, the E39 prices, I notice, are going through a bit of a dip. So if you are an E39 fan like I am, and you want to get yourself into one of these, if you were like me 5 years ago, looking around, you know, to get that dream car of yours, now is the perfect time to pull the trigger, because who knows when the next cycle of value appreciation that these cars will go through again. There's just something about this car that it never stops putting a smile on my face, right? I mean, of course, naturally I will go on to experience newer cars in my life in the future, but I can bet with you, I can tell you this with absolute certainty, there will always be room on my porch for an E39. It's just that now I'm tempted to find a bit more space to also fit an E34.